Okay, a couple of points as we go about basically with this system. We're going to start with the heart. So when we talk about the cardiovascular system, the main idea to keep in mind is the fact that it's a closed system. And we've talked about this early on in the semester when we talked about how we can use blood pressure and a loss of blood and the positive feedback mechanism that actually causes you to lose more blood. So it's a closed system. So that's really important in terms of what we're doing. And then notice that the heart, the primary purpose of the heart, and everybody knows this, to pump blood. That's the whole reason we have the heart. Now, the function then overall is getting O2 in and removing CO2. So when we talk about the heart, you know the basic idea, the basic location of the heart. In between the lungs, we have all of this sitting up in here. Also, keep in mind we have the trachea and the thyroid gland and everything sitting in that general area. So you kind of have an idea of where we're at. Now, the main coverings. Pericardium, remember the pericardium is our serous. Remember we talked about serous membranes back in the integumentary system. And remember that we have the pericardium has both a visceral, which is next to the heart, and a parietal, which is on the outside. So when we look at the pericardium, notice that we have this sac right here. Okay, I'm going to try to highlight the sac. You can see the sac right here, kind of surrounding the heart. And it provides some key functions. The main thing that we know about serous fluid is serous fluid always is both protection and lubrication. And again, since the heart is the pump, it's got to be able to move in a frictionless environment so that it can pump and get all the blood going around and doing everything it needs. Now, again, one of the things to keep in mind in terms of homeostasis, and this is something we'll talk about in the next section, is if that fluid area, you know, this area that's fluid filled, if it gets too filled with fluid, what's going to happen to the ability of the heart to contract and pump? Okay, so keep that in mind as we move through. Now, primary thing about the heart is in order to pump blood, we have three primary layers. We have what's known as the epicardium, outside, where we see connective tissue. We see it linking with the serous membranes, etc. We have the myocardium. This is the cardiac muscle, okay, where everything's happening for the pumping. And the endocardium, which is the inner layer. The endothelium. And, guys, there's a little bit of connective tissue, okay? And this ties in with the heart valves. Okay, so when we start talking about this, you need to recognize that the heart has the heart wall. You can see we have the cavity, we have the outermost layer for our visceral pericardium, then we have the layers, the epicardium, myocardium, and endocardium. So epicardium is out here next to where the visceral pericardium is. We have the myocardium, and then you have this inner layer, which is where the endocardium is. Okay. Now, the other thing to remember is we have four chambers. Okay, we have two ventricles and two atria. So, right and left. Now, again, recognize this is the right side as it is on your body. So, just like while you're looking at this, if you're right-handed, you're taking these notes with your right hand, that's where the right atria and the right ventricle are. Now, as we move through, we have the right and left side. What's kind of cool about the heart is it acts as separate pumps, meaning they are pumping at the same time, but they're literally physically isolated from each other. So they literally are separate pumps. Now, the atria are the superior chambers. Okay, so we have the right atria here, left atria here, and then you have the ventricles, which are the inferior. Now, the atria are what receive the blood. So literally, you see the superior vena cava. You see that sending blood in here. You get just a peek at the inferior vena cava. That's sending blood in here. So this is our right atrium. We're going to go through the valve into the right ventricle, and then it goes out the right ventricle to the lungs. Okay? Then you see it come back by way of the pulmonary veins, comes into the left atrium. It's going to go from the left atrium into the left ventricle, and then from the left ventricle into the aorta, where it goes to the body. Okay, so keep that in mind. So they discharge. So both ventricles send blood out. So now when you look at this, you can see how the blood flow circulates. Okay, pay attention to this diagram, guys. All right, so now the heart valves. They keep the blood flowing in a single direction. That's really important because if you have any backflow, the heart doesn't pump at all. So atrioventricular valves, atrioventricular, so they're between the atria and the ventricles. Okay, so again, atrioventricular, these are your I'm going to get that in green. Atrioventricular are between the atria and the ventricles. Okay, and those are the bicuspid and the tricuspid. Okay, so the bicuspid is on the left, tricuspid is on the right. And what that tells you, bi and tri, is telling you how many parts to the valve there are. The bicuspid literally has 2 parts, the tricuspid literally has 3 parts. So when you look at this, you'll actually be able to see that the valve has 2 versus 3 parts. Now the semilunar, okay, the semilunar are between the ventricles and the arteries. So the semilunar, okay, let's see, let's try black. The semilunar are these ones right here, okay? They're the ones that go from the ventricles into the arteries. So you have a semilunar valve here within the aorta from the left ventricle. You have a semilunar that's the pulmonary semilunar. So it's between the right ventricle and the pulmonary arteries. Now, good to go there. Okay, so aortic and pulmonary. Now, the valves open as blood is pumped through, so it's based on pressure. Okay, pressure forces the valves open. And they're held in place by the heartstrings when they're closed, and they close to prevent backflow. Okay, so you can see the operation of the heart valves. Okay, and just pay attention because again, since they act as separate pumps, that means the ventricles contract at the same time and the atria contract at the same time. So that means they fill and empty at the same time. Okay, great vessels, the aorta is what goes to the major parts of the body. Pulmonary arteries go to these go to the lungs. The vena cava, we have a superior vena cava and an inferior vena cava, and those empty into that right ventricle, and they are what return the systemic blood to the heart. And then the pulmonary veins return the blood from the lungs to the heart. Okay, now coronary circulation, actually up here off of the aorta, there is an area that is where you have the blood leave for the heart. One of the interesting things, when we look at this giant circulation of vessels, giant circulation of blood to the body, the interesting thing is the heart is only pumping blood to itself. That's the sole reason it pumps blood. Everything else is just a bonus. Okay, but it's basically trying to pump blood to itself. So this coronary circulation is really important because if anything happens to the coronary circulation, parts of the heart die. Any heart cell dies, this we call a heart attack. Okay, and that's when there's something happening to an individual heart cell.